In Admin Lesson 10, we're going to go over Finance Settings in Tracker. If we click onto the Tools section, this is where you'll see under the Finance tab, we have the ability to set up our expense settings, our invoice settings, and then also our payment profiles and settings inside here. So first, we'll take a look at customizing an invoice on Tracker and looking at the invoice settings. So when you click on Invoice Settings, it's going to take you into the menu here. And inside of the Invoice Settings, this is where you can impact all of your general settings of the invoice. So in here, you can say when an invoice is raised, I want the default to be either raised, paid, bad debt. You can say for purchase order, we want to allow blank or we want to enforce a purchase order on our invoices. The display invoice paid, we can have it say paid or no. Default payment term, we can put in a global term for invoices. You can also change this at the company level. There is a field that you guys can bring into your view using the layout designer, which we'll show in just a bit. Default tax rate, we can enter in a tax rate for the invoices globally. Down beneath, you have an auto attach approval reports. What this will do is if you are using the timesheet approvals on Tracker, anything that has been approved by the client through the email approval can be auto-attached if you're sending that invoice from the timesheet. You can say yes or no, so it will auto-attach those. The one thing to keep in mind is if anything is manually overridden or you're using the manual authorization tab in Tracker, it would have to be approved from the client in order for it to auto-attach. Lock invoice date on send would mean that once that invoice is sent, it locks the invoice date so it can't be changed. That can be set to yes or no, so you can edit the dates. The invoice item headings says you want to include them or not. You can also choose the font of it. The same thing for quotes that are being sent out on the system. You can have it included or excluded and also choose the font. So the next tab below for quote and invoice items, this is where on the actual invoice itself, there are all the different fields such as item dates, codes, descriptions, the number of units, the value of them, a line subtotal, a tax rate percentage, a tax total, and a line total value that you can just say yes or no. I want to have those on there. For a quotation, if you are sending quotes on Tracker, this is where you can also choose for each of these whether you want them on the quote or not. So it's as simple as ticking the box yes or no. And this can impact the actual invoice itself. So we'll look at the invoice template, which is where all of these settings will impact. So inside of your standard templates in the system, which is under the customization tab, you'll have your system templates. And in here, there's your sales invoice template. So if you open up that invoice template and we go into our template text, this is where you'll have the actual template itself. You'll see that any of those that you're turning off and the actual invoice items, this is where it can turn off what is actually physically displayed in this section for the invoice items. So those can be enabled or they can be, unchecked or disabled just by hitting those yes or no boxes. Now with the invoice itself, this is where obviously you can replace the brackets here. The company name will automatically be tagged in. If you want to put your name, if you want to put a logo, this is where you can use the image designer to either load in an image or use a logo that you've already put on the system. You can also customize any of the information that pulls into this. All of the bracketed tags are going to automatically pull from the system, so you want to be careful to not remove these because when you send the template, it will drive over and it will take those tags from the system. But if you wanted to change anything, such as bank payments should be made to, and you want to put banking and routing numbers down here, if you also want to replace the footer with your guys' address or any information in here, you absolutely can. On the very bottom, where the important info goes here. This is where you can put a footer or any type of information into this particular template. So when this is saved, this is going to be your template that is, driven and sent throughout the system, but it's as easy as updating the text and hitting save. So for invoicing, the next thing we'll take a look at is the company record. So on the company record, there is an optional field in the Layout Designer that you can bring in. So it's called Banking Details. If that is brought in, I've added it just to the very bottom of the profile page on this, so we'll show how you can bring that in just a second. But this is where, at a company level, you can change the invoice payment term to a different amount of days from the global default. You can have a set invoicing day. You can say they're tax exempt, yes, no. You can also have an invoicing frequency on the system. The invoicing contact is where you can tag an invoicing contact if they are entered in and there are contacts on that particular company that you want to add as that particular invoicing contact. So to add that in, if you go into Tools, there is a video on how to use the Layout Designer. But if you click on Layout Designer and we go into our Recruiter layout, this is where on the record screen you pick your company record. And if there's anything you want to tweak, move around, or change, all you need to do is that Banking Details section will be sitting on your left-hand block of available fields. I can grab that section for Banking Details, and I can pick where I want it. If I want it at that very bottom of the front page, I just let go. I hit Save, and that's available and ready to use. So that's the basics on setting up an invoice in the system. Now, next, we'll take a look at setting up payment profiles inside of the system. So in the Finance tab, we have the Invoicing section, which is going to be for sending out invoices to clients. Payments are going to be where you can track any type of payments that you're making or that have been made on the system. So you can track both invoices as well as payments. Now for payments in here, this is where you can go in, and for payment settings, we have the ability to say a default payment status is going to be pending payment, paid, pending approval, approved or rejected. You can have a set amount of payment terms. And then also you can allow or you can enforce a PO if necessary. Payment categories is where you can enter in as many different payment categories if you wanted. So if you wanted to keep track of where or what different segments or categories payments are going to, you can inside of the system. So the next piece is going to be the payment profiles. So this is where you can set up different type of payment profiles on the system. So if one of your payment profiles is going to be an annual, you could put it in here. And you could say save and continue for the profile. Next, we want to add our stages. So in here, if there's different stages, you can put them in and you can order them. But in this case, if it was days, weeks, or months, you could do that. Number of days, and then percent amount due. So here, you could say it's due 30 days from the invoice date. The stage order is going to be number 1, and we could call this, our initial payment. I could hit OK. And when you refresh this page, you can see that I can save and close this in. And we now have a payment profile of annual that you could put in that's due in 30 days. Now you can go in and add as many of these different types of payment profiles, and they can each have their number of stages. You can set the number or the percent amount due. You can change the number of days, as well as the frequency, whether it's days, months, or weeks. So you can build out different types of payment profiles so that when you are tracking that in the system, you can set the payment terms that are there. Now the next piece we'll take a look at under the Tools section is going to be the expense settings and how expenses can be set up on the system. So there's a button to show the icon on the timesheet. So if you don't want expenses shown, this can globally be set yes or no. Expense codes, where we can go and we can build out the different expense codes that we want to be able to be booked against. So if we hit add expense code, we can start to populate them out. If we wanted to have mileage, if we wanted it to be called, whatever we want, so we can have the name be the same, or if we wanted the code to be, MG, we could do that. The description we could put in here if we wanted to put in a description. We can set the territory of that. Unit value, we could go in and say, 55 cents is the value we want to track. No tax rate. Yes, we want it billable. No, not billable. And do we want users to edit, or do we just want to fill in the value and the tax? So here I can hit save and close. It will drop that in. So they would just put in the number of units they have, and it would take the value and add it out. Next, we could go in and say, hotel. We could have a set value for this, or we could go in and leave it blank, so they would enter it in as they're entering their expense. It's up to you guys how you want. But if it was, $150 was what you guys would cover as a ceiling, you could put that in there. Hit save and close, and you can break down the different types of expenses that the candidates would see inside of the portal. Now, these can always be edited if you want to go back in, if you realize that you wanted the code to be different, the name, you want to add in a description, or if you want to change or delete anything, you can do it hitting the delete expense code button, or by simply changing what's in there and hitting save and close. So that's how you can configure the different settings around the finance portion of Tracker in here under the financial settings. The other piece with the invoices on the system is if there is any need to go in and configure a template on top of the invoice that's out, you can always go in and build a new template. For the association, you can pick where you want that template to be associated or sent from. So you can have it associated to the invoice section of Tracker if you want to be able to send it from the invoice. You can also have it associated from the project if you want it pulled directly from the project. So there's a number of different ways that you can build out a template. If that was built from the invoice section, this is where we could go in, enter that in. We could say we want it placed in My Templates, and I can hit Save and Continue. And you'll see that under the template text, we can use our tags, and we can bring in any information from that invoice if we needed to build a potential template that could tag in info from that invoice itself. And now if you wanted it sent from the project to include any information on that, you would simply just have a project association. So that goes over the finance settings of how to configure finances in Tracker.